Okay.
Okay.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Astrospeak. This is a chat show formatted for featuring astrologers arguing, cooperating, agreeing, and disagreeing, inspiring each other and sharing their knowledge. We will be asking questions and asking for feedbacks and opinions, but please remember to keep it short, to the point, and succinct. We wish to have a lively and active show, and all of these questions involve things that I'm pretty sure all of us have experienced. My name is Anthony S. Picco. I'm an astrologer from New York City, and my co-host from the UK is Michaela Villiers-Kendall, also a fine astrologer. So we'll be hosting it and we'll be asking questions. But first, we do have to mention if so many, the Linda Johnson passed away a little while ago, and she was the one that ran a lot of these Zoom meetings, and we wanted to just give a homage to her. So Michaela, you wanted to read a poem from Dane Rudyard. So
yeah, it's a quote.
Take it away.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, it's just a little quotation that Dane Rudyard wrote, sort of the daddy of evolutionary astrology. I'll just read it. So dedicated to Linda. I feel we're at the threshold of a new age. And what we need now more than anything else is a new approach to human relationships and to social organization. We need a planetary approach. We need a synthetic approach. We need something in which the individual learns his own function in the world. Because if you are to have a global world, the individual has to be so well established in his or her own identity that he or she can afford to cooperate with other people all over the world, independent of their culture, their race, their traditions, and so on. It is very important, therefore, that one should learn how to establish oneself in one's own identity. We need a new type of human being. We need something which is based no longer so much on conflict, but on a full acceptance of the total human being, body, mind, soul, feeling, everything. An aesthetic approach versus an ethical approach, so that you can see the relationship in which everything stands inside of the whole. So you can look at the whole and become identified with the wholeness of that whole, rather than with any particular part. Now, this is, of course, a very difficult situation. We are certainly in a difficult time. And what is ahead of us today, I do not know. I am rather pessimistic as far as the immediate future is concerned, considering the way the world and our nation is moving at the present time. But you must realize that crises are sometimes necessary to accomplish what is to be accomplished. The only problem, however, is this. Something must be ready before the great crisis comes, when the new cycle begins, for it will have to begin on the foundation of those seeds which have been sown before the crisis. If you have a winter followed by a spring, I can't see that, but hold on, I'll find that. If you have a winter followed by the spring, but there was no harvest in the fall, no seed will germinate during the spring, and you will have to start at the very beginning, into the most primitive time of manifestation. That's why I have stressed so much all my life the idea I call the seed man and the seed woman, the seed person, the individual who is willing and able to gather within himself or herself, as it were, the past of humanity and particularly of our Western world, but also of other cultures. Because what we want to emerge from the future, after whatever crisis will come, is a global world. We therefore need men and women of great vision, individuals who are not specialists, men and women who have the vision and courage to wait. And to, in some way, through their lives, through their example, and through whatever they leave after their deaths, to become the seeds of the future world. That's, of course, the great choice we all have to make, and we all can make it. We can follow the mass vibration and decay like all the leaves of the world in the fall, however beautiful the golden leaves may be. They will have to decay and become manure for the future of civilization. But it is only the seed men and women that really count, and it is those you should look for if you yourself do not feel yet to the point of being ready to become a seed person, because it is only that which the insurance of the future rebirth of humanity. I think it is of no use to try to look to the immediate future because it looks very dark, but it is to look to prepare for the possibility that a new world may arise, if not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. I think it is the only thing which gives value to our sacrifice, all our courage, decisions, and choices today. It is to become seeds for the development of the future world. So I hope every one of you, each one in your own life, in your way, can, someday soon, very soon, if you've not done it already, make the choice and become seed men and seed women. And so was Linda, to a great extent. Thank you.
Yes, Linda's definitely a major seed because we're all still here doing what she planted. So
Yes, exactly. She was a gardener, as Stacy said.
so okay. Basically, the way we do this is Michaela and I trade questions. I'll start with the first one, and if you want to answer it, you raise your hand or squawk or whatever it is you need to do to get attention, and we give you a few minutes. If it's a big, deep question, you can go on a little bit, but the idea is to be succinct and keep it going. And so the first question I ask is, do you find your clients come to you in batches? Like maybe 6 weeks of a bunch of Saturn returns, 3 weeks of Pluto transits. Do you find there are themes to the flow of your clients as you do astrology?
Right. So are you going to answer your own question first, Anthony, or shall I? Or someone else?
Well, I'll start with my comments. I have noticed that. I do notice lately for the past 6 months, I'm getting people who are struggling with Neptune. And in the past, I've had like 3 or 4 months of like all Saturn returns showing up around the same time. I often do find myself, when it's a Saturn transit, I find myself manifesting the Saturn for them because they're coming to seek learning, they're coming to seek knowledge. Then the astrologer, particularly if it's in opposition, is the person bringing them that kind of energy that they need told. I don't know who raised their hand first, but Stacy, do you want to hit first? Go right ahead.
Sure.
Answer whatever you can.
Yeah, I personally don't notice any, I don't analyze my clients that closely where, you know what I mean? But what I do find is that people do tend to come up when they have something that is of importance to themselves that they have not been able to objectify. And so they're looking for a little bit of that feedback and a little bit of that help to understand their dynamics. So it could be anything from a Saturn return to just, you know, a major square pattern, or it could be anything. But yes, they do show up when they can feel the tides ahead, that something is going to be required, and maybe they're at a point where they're not sure which direction to go, or maybe they don't have confidence in themselves. And, you know, and so a reading will often establish that. It'll help them understand their dynamics, and it'll help them understand what they're working on in their life. And it's the astrologer's job to really help them get on that path and focus there. So that's my answer.
Okay. Ryan, you want to let it rip? Got to unmute. There you go.
Hi there. Sure. Yes, at times I have seen patterns emerge here and there, 2 or 3 in a row with a particular question regarding Uranus and the change in their life. That will happen. What I have found most personally, and as a Sagittarian, this is quite apropos, I suppose, but quite often, in fact, 9 times out of 10, clients will come to me and I will monologue and soliloquize about whatever the patterns are, and I am quite often like, oh, this is something that I need to learn. Oh, this is something that I need to embody. So one of the things I love about astrology is that there's always a nugget of wisdom in there, no matter how much we think we know about astrology. There's always something that we as astrologers can learn. So as far as patterns, yeah, there's always a pattern for me, which is just as I'm professing, whatever meanings I can suss out of an individual's chart, and doing what I can to encourage and help them on their path with as much clarity as possible, I'm also learning and integrating a good amount of those things myself. So there's that.
I agree. I've first 10 years I was a good astrologer. It was maybe only in the past 15 I've become a really good astrologer, because you just keep learning. I have so many clients that come to me and it's like, I wouldn't have thought to manifest it that way, but I got it now. I understand it. There's another nuance that enriches. Amanda, no, wait, somebody had their hand up.
I did.
Oh, it was you? Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. I think I noticed like three main patterns that kind of overlap at times. And so one of them will be that I'll get like, recently I've had a lot of people who have the moon in mid degrees of fixed. So they're all receiving the Saturn Uranus square on their emotional body. And I'm noticing that trend a lot. The second pattern is, like Ryan was saying, that it will be, evocative of things that I need to work on or things that are up in my life. And sometimes there's some overlap there. Like, it's not lost on me that next year my moon will be receiving the Saturn Uranus square. So I'm kind of like paying attention to what people are going through with it now. And then I think there's an overarching pattern that I can definitely tell when I have clients who, like, there's a really strong practitioner client relationship there. Like, they're my people. And that's always really exciting to have it come in and then see where it goes, if it goes anywhere.
And Eric, if you're still with us, let's see what you have to say.
Yep, I'm still with you. However, I'm not sure at this point I could say anything else that anyone else hasn't already said, but I do agree. I see clustered incoming individuals that are experiencing very similar transits. I can not just that they're experiencing the same type of thing, like a Saturn return or a Pluto square the sun or whatever maybe, but particularly when there is a large mundane event going on in the sky. So the Saturn Jupiter conjunction, I had a huge influx of people where that conjunction was hitting a personal point or planet for like 2 months straight. Like, that was the focus of all of my readings. Yeah,
it's like last year we got a lot of Pluto people in, and then this year the Saturn Uranus square people are turning up. They're getting hit by it. Sarah, you have your hand up?
Yeah. So I guess to add to this all, for me, my clients seem to come to me based on what I offer. So it's not really so much about certain transits. It's more about the work that we do, because my astrology is mostly focused on shadow work and stuff like that. So there's not really a consistency in the transits based on when they show up. It's almost like they come to me through, I would say, more serendipity. It's like almost like a personal relationship that we often have. But that's kind of how I'm set up. Like, I consider myself a confidant-based astrologer, so it's a little bit more personal, I suppose. I just wanted to contribute that to the conversation.
Sure, makes sense. Michaela, you want to launch the next question?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so right. So have you noticed how the progressed sun plays out in the chart with regard to the seed of service I was just quoting, to the collective and possibly or the outer planetary nodes? For instance, the progressed sun will go through potentially 90 degrees, if you're lucky, we're lucky, or so during a lifetime of service. So depending on what contacts, obviously, it makes, and very, very much the conjunctions, squares, oppositions, shows the progress of our learning what we have to offer the world. So I wondered what anyone said about that. And I was going to, hold on. Yeah, I was going to talk about ask about the particular, now the cycle we're having, the 45-year cycle of the Saturn-Uranus long cycle, which I've got a correction to make. I said it began in 1988. It actually began 45 years, obviously, began in 1975. Actually, on my just after my birthday, the 4th of October. So it did hit me quite a lot. And at the moment, we are in the waning square. So looking back over that, and obviously if you're younger, where you picked up on it in that whole cycle, I wondered what observations everyone had about that.
2 questions. One is about the progressed sun, and the other is about the Uranus
the whole thing,
Saturn square. Okay. Anybody want to tackle that? While you're thinking about it, I'll just say this much. I have noticed, and this is just philosophically in general, I think it's fascinating that the progressed sun means every one of us moves into the next 2 signs at some point in our life. And so I look at, I'd like to at some point really examine that, like every Capricorn becomes an Aquarian and then becomes Piscean. And then you hang out long enough, and I just progressed into Aries recently. And it's almost as if, I mean, I'm still a Capricorn, but it's almost like the progressions soften and nuance the immediate nature you had when you were born in the until your sun progressed out of that sign. Does anybody want to oh, Stacey, you got your hand up, so go right ahead.
Well, mine wasn't more so much about the progressed, but it was more about the Saturn Uranus cycle. Should I talk now, or should we get other people?
I think that's legit.
Okay. Yeah, so I was born around the time of that conjunction, just a little bit after, and definitely one of the things, because the Saturn Uranus cycle is a cycle where it's establishing a social tone every 48 years, and society evolves. It has to liberate from prior constructs, and that's definitely an impulse that I have noticed within my own soul, which is, I'm born, I start out my childhood, adolescence, and I'm like, I don't belong here. And, that last conjunction, if I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, 29 Sagittarius, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So what we're talking about here is truth. The social tone is, to find your truth within this society. And that's definitely something that I felt very magnetized to the point of kind of rebelling against certain Saturnian expectations. And it really has, and it has been a lifelong, I mean, all of these, since then, I've been working on that. There's a lot of liberation that I've been having to do. There's been a lot of courage that I've had to manifest to really stand up and say, okay, this is what I am. I may not be enough in your view, but this is who I am. This is what I can offer. And, to not do that with trepidation. And so I guess that's just my little contribution to that.
And out of just talking about the Uranus Saturn square, just a quickie question, Michaela. Do you also focus on the opposition? Are you really more concerned with the square than the opposition? Because there's actually, I think, 4 key points. There's a conjunction, the opening and closing square, and then the opposition. And I just in the middle of advising a client yesterday who has Saturn in Pisces opposite the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in the 60s. And ironically, she's about a year away from having Neptune affect all 3 of those planets. So, and she's got the Uranus opposite Saturn is like, I've got to be completely free, but I've got to follow the rules, which drives her a little nuts. She's a Capricorn too. That never helps. So just as a thought, just a side comment, Stacey, Sarah, let her rip, whatever you got to say.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. Just thinking about the Saturn Uranus final square there. And what Stacey was saying about it being at 29 Sag at the initial conjunction, we can really see with that final square, that crisis in consciousness, where a lot of us are really starting to see that, how society is set up, Saturn, doesn't really jive with who we are as individuals. It's not always accommodating to that. I mean, I'm a very Uranian person, so I feel that more. Maybe other people feel it less, but I can see where there's also a letting go so that we don't move away from society completely, so that we can find a way to sow those seeds for the next cycle to come, much like that Dane Rudyard passage that Michaela was reading.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that conjunction in 1988 was conjunct the galactic center, of course, too. So, which is a really meaningful point, particularly at the moment. We're going through this huge change. So I mean, for me in 1988, that's why I picked that. I made that mistake of putting 1988 because that was the part I picked in the cycle. On a collective level, the crashing of the bombing of the Lockerbie, the Maid of the Oceans, it was Maid of the Seas, it was called, the plane, the US plane that went down in December 21st. And that's the solstice, of course. So it was a very, I think, you know, some events like that are sort of harbingers, like Titanic, and they are, and the Twin Towers, you know, they are sort of markers for humanity of what we need to be warned about and what's to come. Maid of the Seed is a very Neptunian, of course, it's a name. And funnily enough, my sister was on the other plane. What came out of that for me was she was on the other plane that was going at the same time to Washington, DC. And so she could have easily been going to New York. But what came out of it, I was stunned that she was on, you know, I saw her off and I saw the people go in, and it was very hard to conceive of what had happened to them. And it seemed surreal. But I tried to talk to her about it, and she sort of was denying it. She didn't seem to see the near miss she'd had. And that was another sort of progression for me in understanding that we go into denial and we sort of go into cognitive dissonance. And that's part of humanity's problem, that we don't really engage. And that's why astrology is so great, because it allows us to engage and find meaning instead of just cutting off. And that was a major lesson for me then. But I wondered if anyone else can pick out anything in the cycle that they could relate that way.
Ryan's got his hand up.
Ryan, great.
Hi, yeah, jamming on the Saturn-Uranus square, and how interesting it is that the conjunction came at 29 Sag. Using a system of astrological observation I am developing called seasonal archetypology, a lecture, by the way, I will be presenting to the San Francisco Astrological Society this evening. The zodiac actually may end at Sagittarius. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, not Pisces, Sagittarius, upending the entire system. Everything begins with Capricorn. Tune in later for the whys and wherefores. If we were to assume that everything ends at that super colossal black hole at the center of the galaxy, the great mystery, who knows where it goes? Yeehaw, Sagittarius, have as much joy and wisdom and meaning as possible before we enter the great mystery and are reborn at winter solstice. If we are to look at the conjunction of Saturn and Uranus at that point of the end of a cycle, what we're looking at is a culmination of culture throughout history that manifests in this cycle that we are in. So since the mid-70s, we have been in a culminating phase of human cultural and civilizational evolution, where the structures, Saturn, need to frigging change. Uranus. How do we change? First, we become aware of what the entire growth and evolution of human civilization has been up until now. And if we were to say that some of Western culture and Western European civilization, however we want to say it, Western civilization, when that started, and I'm trying not to make this a whole lecture, believe me.
That's good.
if we want to go all the way back to the advent of patriarchy, when we tried to, say, control and dominate nature, and instead of working co-creatively with the rhythms of nature, we tried to then control and dominate nature. We have been in this cycle of civilization for what, 10,000 years? I'm not an anthropologist.
But you're
And now,
Sagittarian, for sure.
since the mid 70s, we have been aware through a multitude of different avenues that the patriarchal dominance of control and manipulation of nature and the great goddess has to come to an end. And so here we are in the waning square of this Saturn-Uranus cycle that is about, in my perception, the culmination of the end of Western civilization as we know it. Woohoo!
Well, we're certainly,
then what's happening is we are all finding this trauma percolate up into our lives in various ways. And depending on the placement of planets and points in our chart, how the Saturn-Uranus square is affecting us. And so, just really quickly, in conclusion, let's take this time, let's take this opportunity to do the hard work, waning square, of becoming very aware of the structures that no longer work and how to revolutionize them, Saturn in Aquarius, as we realize whatever trauma Uranus we have experienced through our connection with nature, Taurus, and how we can do the work to rectify that, not only in ourselves, but in our society, not only in society, but in ourselves. That's the work, in my observation, of the Saturn-Uranus square on the deepest level.
Very good answer. Excellent.
Okay. I want to throw in a couple of quickie things here before I move on. I can see Sagittarius as the end of the growth cycle, because it starts with Aries. We plant things, we grow them, we harvest them. And then the Capricorn cycle to Aries is really the period of stasis, when you have to plan ahead and connect together whatever you've already done. Everybody has a different opinion, and they're probably all true. So I don't want to argue with that. Two, there's a wonderful book called The Chalice and the Blade. I think her name is Rian Eisler, I'm not sure. And she's pointing out that written history began when men began to dominate, and that there's plenty of history before that, and she's uncovered quite a bit of it, showing when they were actually equal sexes, as opposed to, one of my favorite comments she makes is that the Romans used to talk about how the Etruscans were monsters and horrible people. And then we dug up stuff that we realized that women owned property, were part of the society, could vote, and cooperated completely, but the victor writes the history. So I would also say, yes, we are coming to the end of Western civilization, because the age of Aquarius is taking effect, and that triangle thing is changing. We're having the individual serving society, not people gathering together in giant pyramids of government and what structure to do that. But we've gone completely off from what Michaela was asking about. Although we've had a lot of fun with it.
That's good. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
If nobody has any questions, we'll go to something, anything else addition. And by the way, I don't disagree with you, Ryan. I'm just saying there's nuances that, all over the place of this. Go right ahead.
Nutshell,
You'll just have to wait till I present all my findings in my yet to be published book. I'm sure I'll make a believer.
That's good.
Wait.
And you sound very Sagittarian, by the way. Okay. Quickie, next question. This is something I always find kind of amusing. Sometimes I hear astrologers or non-astrologers going like, for my solar return, I'm flying to Boston for 2 days so I can experience my solar return there. And now, to me, you can't trick astrology. Okay, if you live in New York City and you're there all the time, that's where your solar return belongs. Now, if you were assigned to get a freelance job in San Diego for 6 months, and it happens to be that's when your birthday is, then that to me would be a reasonable place to set up a solar return. So I'm just wondering what anybody thinks of these 3-day solar return weekend trips, whether you think it's legit or whether take it away. if
Who wants
anybody
to
has
go?
anything to say.
Yeah, I agree with you, Anthony. I think you can't cheat. You know, it's like trying to control too much instead of actually working with astrology and trying to define what it wants for you rather than what you want to impose on it. So yeah, I agree with you briefly. Stacey, is it?
Yeah, so my opinion is, yeah, you cannot cheat. You can't cheat astrology. I absolutely agree with that. But, you know, there is also this dynamic of, you know, sometimes when you get outside of your environment and you go somewhere special or somewhere where you feel called, particularly when there's something as significant as a solar return occurring, I think that it absolutely can enhance your experience. I'm not saying like that's what everyone should do, but if someone feels called to it, I think they should absolutely explore that.
Eric, you don't hope. Eric, you want to let rip?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was on mute. Let me take my hand down. So, I've heard this for years. I've gone back and forth on it, and I've spent a lot of time really thinking about what I believe in this, because first I thought it was something that was valid, and then I thought it was crap, and then I thought it was valid again, and back and forth. The conclusion that I've come to is that a solar return, no matter where you live in the world, if you're born in Europe but you live in the US, the solar return seems to work best for me when you use the place of birth for the solar return chart. It doesn't matter where you're living. Now, with that being said, I do believe that you year based on where you are when that happens. But you still have to utilize birth chart. My rationale for how that can kind of blend an extra layer of what we can do in that year comes down to the fact that ancient maxim of as above, so below. You know, I practice medieval type astrology. I blend it with modern. I'm not an evolutionary astrologer, but I also believe that we can compel the heavens. We can't command them. So if I believe that if I make a wish on a full moon, or I create a charm or a sigil at an astrologically auspicious moment that was given by the laws of the ancient astrological magicians, then I have to believe that the same would be true if I go somewhere to be under that alignment, because astrology has always been observational, right? You know, the idea of being able to move a chart, you know, all around the globe is fairly new to us. So the core of astrology is that this is where we live, this is where we practice astrology, this is where our life happens. So, you know, those are my thoughts on that. With that being said, one other thing to trying to outsmart astrology, which I don't think that it is cheating astrology. You know, I think that there is a predetermined destiny to wanting to be somewhere else on your birthday and making the decision to being there, is that to remember that wishes come true, not free.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Ryan, you got a little more to add?
Sure. The real quick technical observation that I'll make is that when I cast a progressed chart, I will change the location based on if that person moved at any time within, say, a month or 2 or 3 after their birth. If someone was born in New York City, a month later, they moved to, say, Saskatchewan, and they lived there for 10 years, and then they just moved to California, I'm going to do a solar return for them in Saskatchewan. Does that make sense? Did I explain that correctly?
I
Yeah.
followed, I understood. Mhm.
You're able to follow that? Okay. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, Michaela, your question next, whatever you want.
Okay. Right. Which was it? Yeah. Okay. I think I combined 2 questions there, so I've put myself off a bit. But okay, have you thought you should warn someone about a particularly hard transit and either fail to do so or wish that you hadn't? So
I'll kick this off by saying, if I didn't warn somebody about an upcoming transit, I would be derelict in my duty as an astrologer. My goal is if I see something horrible coming up, you find a way to make it understandable and palatable and dealable for the client. You know, I had some fun the other day because that woman is getting Neptune on her Saturn and opposing her Uranus and Pluto at the same time on her midheaven nadir axis, and that's a heck of a transit. Because it's kind of hard to turn to somebody and say, well, everything's going to dissolve, you know, when it hits your Saturn. What do you do with that? But by being prepared for it and knowing it keeps her from panicking when it happens, you know, which is one of the wonderful things about upcoming transits. And I saw somebody write something on Facebook the other day saying they had asked the client if they want to know about some tough times coming up, and the client said no. And then 15 years later said, I wish I'd listened to my astrologer. And my only thought was, why would an astrologer ask if the person wants to hear something negative? That's like, I go to my eye doctor and say, no, I don't want an eye examination. Just, you know, give me glasses. I mean, it just seems, so I would say I would have to tell a person. I would never not tell them. That's my take on it. Stacy, got your hand up.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what you're saying, Anthony, and which is that, you know, when we're looking at a chart and someone is coming to us with the sincere desire to understand how they can command their lives better and live their lives better and, you know, be on the right path for themselves, you have to look at transits. The way that I do it, I don't necessarily see like a bunch of squares as a negative transit. It's easy to do that because we're all conditioned to think that squares and sesqui quads and quincunx, you know, like, you know, there's so many things that have like stigmas, but it's all about cooperating with the direction of the dynamic. So a square, it's, you know, it's asking for some effort. You know, there's going to be a dynamic tension. It's a creative time, or a time where you're separating from maybe, you know, known ways of being, but it's a constructive time, and you have to approach it that way. You can't set the client up by saying, you know, you've got this really bad period coming up or this really hard period. Sure. The best thing you can do is just look at the individual transits and look at for the energy that they, you know, that is required to fulfill them. And in that way, they fulfill the purpose. And a lot of times what I've found is when people cooperate, the dynamics tend to be a lot less intense and easier to assimilate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you can't judge, can you? You can't judge is what's bad and what's good, because it doesn't work that way. You know, everything has its positive side to it. Who has their hand up? Sarah?
Yep. Sarah, go ahead. Did you change your mind, Sarah?
Maybe it's by mistake.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was muted and on my
okay,
actual mic and not in Zoom, sorry. What I wanted to say was, it's just like being a doctor in the sense that what we're administering and what we're saying can be really taken to heart. And so, I don't know, personally, my approach is always to encourage people to feel like they can handle any transit that comes up, even if it's seemingly challenging. Because just like Stacy was saying, it's about the dynamic, right? If we approach it almost like sailing, if we approach the wind with our sail at a certain angle, we're going to do really well and go in the direction we want to go. We got to work with the weather, right? That's just where I'm coming from.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember I had a client once tell me, like, if only she didn't have Saturn in her chart, she'd be happy. It's like, it's not how it works, honey. Eric, you had something to say?
Yeah, I agree with what pretty much everybody has said. I think that Sarah has given a really amazing analogy, with the wind in your sails, because we have, we call it astrological, the astro weather. We have weather forecasts, and just because there's right now, there is the potential for a tornado, as I have shared with you guys. It does not mean that tornado is necessarily going to drop down, but it is good for me to be aware. And that's how I, approach those things with clients in terms of squares and trines and quincunxes and inconjuncts. What's good and what's bad, I think is very relative to the natal promise. However it's going to be triggered. And of course, it goes without saying that, a transit won't necessarily do anything unless it's supported by, the other charts that you're, using with progressions. But I've lost my focus.
Yeah,
but you were sailing. Go ahead.
Yeah, we were sailing. That's right. That's right. So,
Okay.
I think that we can approach those things. That training on how to have difficult conversations is so incredibly important for astrologers, because there are times where that happens. And, people, I've noticed in the years that I've done this, that people don't want vague fluff. They want to know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and what is the likelihood it's going to happen. I mean, I run my predictions based on statistical analysis. Here's the chance of this happening. People are much more, I think, feel empowered to knowing, like, okay, this is the potential for X, Y, and Z. This is what I can do to, make that difficult challenge or transition easier for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it gives people a sense of meaning. That's the most valuable thing in prediction, is that it's there's a pattern, there's a meaning, and the level of consciousness is everything to do with how things turn out, how they unfold. I mean, I did have an incident once that really gave me pause for thought about the whole thing. There was a friend who was a client too, and I'd given them some very good news, about, I'd done a successful prediction about them having a baby, and they were really happy about that. So I'd gone into their chart, and this was all wonderful. But then I noticed that this person's birthday was coming up, and then, I mean, this was back in 2015 when there was this, that terrible Uranus-Pluto square, and it was exact, and it was right on his sun. But then I noticed that there was an eclipse also on his birthday, very close to his birthday, at the same time as this this transit was exact. I thought, God, that's a bit, and also Chiron was right on his moon, and so there was a lot. And I thought, what shall I do? Shall I say something? Because, this look, I should, but I decided I should ask him how he was, ask him how, because I knew he had responsibilities with the new kids and everything. So I thought, I'll ask how he's feeling and just sound him out and just say, well, and give support and try and find out what was going on, because obviously something was brewing. What happened was, he had his birthday barbecue was postponed. I was supposed to go to that with my partner. It was postponed, and it happened the week after, the week after, which was the exact transit instead. And there was a terrible incident. I won't go into details, but his mother was actually murdered. And so it made me feel like, well, what is that about? To see that there is but what I thought was, after giving it a lot of thought, was something was brewing. Something was fated. Sometimes there is a perfect storm with the analogy of sailing. And there's nothing you can do to avoid it. There is something going to transpire, and it shows the convergence of the transits. And consciousness is possibly the only thing that mitigates it. And the more conscious one is, unfortunately, everyone in the circumstances weren't conscious. There was a lot of rage around, a lot of confusion, and it came to the worst. But what I did think was the danger was to him. And it turned out it was his mother who took the fall. And that's how I saw it afterwards, because her sun was actually at the same degree as his moon, which Chiron was on. And it was like she actually did take the fall for him, which is, yeah. So it was very deep, but it did give a lot of thought to, well, God, is, how much is fate? How much is choice? How much has to happen? And how much do you say? But I'm glad I didn't say anything, but then I wasn't going to say anything. I didn't know anything that terrible was going to happen. I just knew something was brewing. But yeah.
I think sometimes, just to wrap this up, this goes way, way back to early readings. I told this woman that Pluto and the moon were doing something together. I don't remember. I don't have that many brain cells left. But I remember telling her, in the next year, you're going to undergo a complete transformation of your relationship with your mother. And she contacted me a year later. Her mother developed cancer. She became her mother's caretaker and helped her die. And it certainly completely and utterly changed the relationship. But what I predicted, oh, your mom's going to die, and no, you can't do that.
No.
So it's all I can do is when there's a tough transit coming up, is I offer people, here are some possible ideas, here are the themes of what's happening, and hopefully you'll recognize it when it starts to happen to you, because I've given you the foundation of what it means. Next question, if we're done here, is unaspected planets in a chart. How do you deal with them? And by unaspected, I did a chart recently. Everything was connected in a big pattern, except Venus and the moon made like biquintiles to something. And I'm not knocking biquintiles, but even in other charts, there may be no aspects whatsoever. What do you tell your clients? How do you see these things? As in terms of a chart reading, like how do you talk to them about unaspected planets? You may not name it to them that way, but how do you express the energy that you see as a result of that to your client?
Stacey?
Go ahead, Stacey.
Yeah, for me, it doesn't matter if a planet is unaspected, because consciousness has certain functions and every planet correlates to a function in our consciousness. Mm-hmm. So whether or not it's aspected or not, it's still in play. And we can see that through even transits, right? Well, first, if a planet is unaspected, it's still ruling some house, in some cases 2 houses within the zodiac. And then we have transits, we have progressions, we have different kinds of charts that we can look at where they might be illuminated. And so you always have to consider those things, because it's an integral part of your consciousness. So that's it.
Yes, I would agree. I do believe it's all part of the same chart. But very quickly before we get to you, Ryan, like I had somebody recently, she was a Capricorn with a completely unaspected Pisces moon. And so she had empathy, but she was also a Capricorn. So it was a struggle for her to put them together, where maybe if it had been a sextile, I would have imagined it might have been easier for her to tap into that moon, as opposed to this moon just wandering around by itself going, I love everybody. And it's like, yeah, but everybody else doesn't feel that way. Ryan, let her rip.
I just want to clap for both of the answers here, because I was pretty much going to say both things. Yes, that even if a planet is unaspected, like say the moon in the first house in Sagittarius is unaspected, that's still a pretty powerful point, still pretty worth talking about, still very valuable, still a function of the human. And so we can still talk about that, just not necessarily, and how it relates to your relationships or is this way, we don't necessarily bring that in. So it's still very important. That being said, going off your answer, Anthony, yeah, sometimes it can feel like an interception or a retrograde where, you know we have this energy, maybe we don't exactly know what to do with it or don't know where to put it. And so maybe some of the work for an unaspected planet is for us to give a little more of our own personal focus and exploration to that planet, that archetype.
Sarah, you have something to add?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to the phasal relationship between the planets can give a lot of information. So if you had an unaspected Pisces moon, and for this example here, we could look at the phasal relationship between Venus or Mars or the Sun, just depending on maybe what their focus is and what their questions are. We can pick an appropriate planet, look at the phasal relationships, and get maybe a more complete picture about where they're at in their specific evolutionary journey with regard to that moon and the planetary energy, like say Saturn or something like that, as far as who they are on the inside and who they are as a social being, in society, I should say.
Okay. If nothing left to say on that, we can move on to whatever the next question Michaela would like to ask.
Where was I in this? Okay. Do you use fixed stars, asteroids, eclipses, etc.? And what results have you had with extra?
All I can say is no.
No?
I don't knock them. I don't say they don't matter, but I find just personally, I get a lot out of the basic chart. I even actually kind of refer to myself as a meat and potatoes astrologer. It's like, let's get right to the core. I believe you could logically, using every technique known, give a 12-hour reading to somebody, but there's only so much that can be absorbed. So I tend to favor stripping back, and I notice them. If people talk about them, I'll listen to a lecture or whatever, but I don't often incorporate them into my, except Chiron I'll drag in. It's been around for 50 years, so I'll kind of look at Chiron more than anything else.
It can get
Eric, you got your hand up first.
Yeah, I mean, you had to know Eric was going to say something about the fixed stars. So I do use them. I don't use them in every reading. I think they're fascinating. They're wonderful. I'm still learning how to use them. But what I do pay attention to, what I check with every new client, is the ascendant, sun, moon, and midheaven. And I see if there are any fixed stars on those. If not, then I check the other planets, with the exception of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So inner and the personal and social planets I check. And what I found is that the imagery that is given to those stars, especially if they have, and they'll often have, the nature of 2 or more planets, really gives an unbelievable amount of color to that planetary point or interpretation. Specifically to the midheaven or ascendant, they will almost without fail for me so far. I mean, I may run into a time where it doesn't work, but when they sit on one of those points, the events that are associated with that star have always come to fruition in that client's life. For example, I have a client who has, I can't remember, I'm really bad with remembering the names of the fixed stars outside of the 4 royal stars, but this star ruled anxiety. And it was sitting right on their ascendant, and anxiety research is something that I'm working on with the astro investigators. But this person spends about 2 months out of every year in psychiatric placement dealing with intense panic attacks, and they don't have any other mental health issues where they can't care for themselves, but they constantly need that check in, because they often see the ascendant as themes that will repeat through our lives, and that is probably one of the, I've hundreds of examples, but that one just kind of always sticks out in my mind.
Okay. I want to welcome 615, whoever they are. There's no name there. Sarah, you wanted to have an answer, offer an answer?
Yeah, I love asteroids. I know it can really muddy up a chart by adding extra information, but That's the nature of my work, is really understanding the facets of humanity. I've got a Uranus in Scorpio. I'm part of that generation. So the fragmentation and wanting to piece that together and understand why is huge for me. So love asteroids, because a lot of my clients, they're wanting to go into those deeper dives and find those fragments. And yeah, it can get convoluted, but if you're really, really, really wanting to pick through and understand yourself, certain asteroids, if they're hitting angles or major planets, they can reveal so much about who you are, or if they're on the south node, for instance, past life information or DNA coded information. So I really, really dig asteroids, especially I love Lucifer's a great one if you're working on your spirituality and wanting to check yourself before you wreck yourself. It's a great one. And just to add a couple others, I like ones like, just like for me personally, I'm a big fan of Lilith because, just with the feminine, it's very useful. And trying to think of some fun ones. Oh, Cassandra, Pandora, Pan, but there's so many. I mean, there's literally tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of named asteroids. So, if people want to expand on astrology and get like really Sherlocky, by the way, there is a Sherlock asteroid and a potato asteroid. So yeah, I'm just saying you can have fun with it, right? It can be a lot of fun, but it can also really reveal extra facets if you're dealing with ego fragmentation or any kind of like mental illness in that regard. It can help a lot. So that's where I'm coming from with it.
Okay,
Yeah, I
Stacey?
mean, I just got interested lately, and fixed stars, not to use them all the time. Like, it can get confusing, like you said, Anthony, but I think now and again to intuitively be drawn to them and then just notice that, a really relevant point in the chart is pointing to them. It can really explain something you didn't understand before. I mean, Sue's really great on asteroids too. You should ask Sue about.
I have a tendency to mostly do natal charts. I can understand in other areas asteroids are very handy. I also love when somebody says, I got my chart done up, and they put every asteroid they could find on astro.com.
Oh, well.
And they send you a chart, and it's like, rah! It's like a firecracker explosion.
Yeah.
Stacey, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, as Sarah mentioned, I also use the asteroid Lucifer quite a bit. I've noticed a lot of observation and correlation tying together where, something that is intended can tend to have the opposite result, where there's just this voice of defeat in your mind. And but the trick to that is to not listening to the voice, to putting the voice in its place, and to orienting to the higher source, whatever you call it. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, that power is no longer, it turns into the bearer of light, which means that it doesn't create the opposite reality intended anymore. It actually bursts through major obstacles and things that you wouldn't think were otherwise possible. So to me, it's really an asteroid of faith and applying your will in one way or the other. So I've had I use that one quite a bit as well.
Yeah, Jeff Wolfe Green wrote a good book on that too, on Lucifer. So it's sort of like shadow, isn't it? Jung's shadow. It's similar to that. As you say, it's like the voice that you can choose not to listen to, but to get aware of. Yeah, very useful.
Absolutely. And when you do listen to it, that's what happens. It's the opposite reality intended. I've got, like, it's crazy. I have my Lucifer is on 10 Taurus. And it seems like every time I look at my damn chart, a transit or this and that, there's something on that point. And, you just got to have courage and, face it with eyes wide open and, just be really clear about your alignment.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I'd like to say, even though I don't use them, I do respect them. I'm not in any way dismissing them, just that I can only handle so much. My mind starts to go.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so here's an interesting question. Have you ever had a client, let me put this, do you have any sample stories of unhappy clients that contacted you after the reading? Okay. I just one quick example that recently happened to me, and this is a new experience to me. I thought she would be completely one way. Everything I thought about it was right, except that the repressive qualities were stronger than the Martian qualities I saw in a chart, which was a battle going on. And I thought as we talked that we had worked it out. And then a week later, I got an 8-page Windows Word document explaining how she disagreed with my reading. And it wasn't angry or anything. She was pointing out like she's more into this Alice Bailey thing, and she had all of her own opinions, which by the way doesn't surprise me from her chart, but I had never gotten something quite so intense in my life. I'm wondering, have you had clients that have been unhappy, what you felt about them, whether they were wrong and delusional, or whether you missed something that they pointed out to you? Just something to consider. Eric, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
I do. As I get older, feedback has certainly shifted. I personally really enjoy when somebody gets back to me and says, hey, this didn't happen or this wasn't right, because then I can go back and figure out what it was that, I did wrong so it doesn't happen again. I'm a big believer in, blame the astrologer, not the astrology. So I always want to be the first one to know if I didn't get something right. But one event that that sticks out of my mind, because you're looking for an example, was there was a woman who I was working with for a number of years. Actually, I still work with her occasionally, usually like twice a year. And she was wondering when she was going to get a job. Things were going on. I pulled up a couple of women that could happen, and then from there we kind of worked into what are the periods, weeks, months, where this could happen, and none of them came through. None of them manifested the way that they were supposed to, or at least the way that I thought I did. And then I was like, oh gosh, I'm like, you know what, maybe there isn't anything to this predictive astrology and I shouldn't be one. But come to find out, she had not applied for any jobs. She just assumed that she was going to that her resume was going to just sit on Indeed, and people were going to come decide to offer her a job. So we had to have a conversation of, well, yeah, that certainly can happen, and it does happen to people, but you got to meet the heavens halfway here. So we recalculated a couple more, points. And I was like, all right, send applications out on this date, this date, this date. You'll probably hear around here, here, and here. And then they did. But I mean, she was really upset because I had worked with her years at this point. She goes, I don't know what you did. I'm like, I'll give you your money back. I'm like, but let me figure out what we did wrong here. Let me make this right for you.
Okay, Brian, go ahead. Let her rip.
3 times in my professional career. Once, I did a reading for like a balsamic Pisces moon, Pisces sun, 12th house individual. And I read the chart in terms of relative spiritual sophistication and creative inspiration and being open to downloads and all of this potential for magic and beauty. And I read it in a very positive, uplifting, and empowering way that way. And when I was done with the reading, she said, well, thank you. That was all very interesting. And I don't think much of it applies to me. And I was like, oh, okay, well, do you want me to reread? Do you want me to spin it this way? Do you want your money? But no, I'm just going to sit with it. And I was like, oh, geez, this is the first time anybody's ever, said that's not totally awesome, or whatever. And so I was a little disappointed in myself or whatever. A year goes by, she calls me up and says, oh my God, I haven't stopped thinking about that reading you gave me, and it was so totally awesome, and I've been applying everything into my life, and my life has changed, and everything's so great. And so I was like, oh, okay, so I did do it. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. Shoot. Okay. Phew. And the second time that happened, I often, as a Neptunian, I often light the song with sense and color and metaphor and simile and poetry and sense impression. And yeah, she was a Virgo. And so so it was a recorded reading, and she wrote me an email back saying, that was, really colorful and everything, but I want to know when this is going to happen at this time. I want to know, what year, and she had studied a little astrology. I want to know what an inconjunct between Uranus and Saturn means specifically. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I redid the reading ultra Virgo style, which was basically taking the reading that I did and took out all the poetry and just said, Uranus is square your moon at this day and this time. And she was so much happier with it. So it's always important to know, or to at least try to intuit, who you're talking to. You're talking to a Virgo, they might not necessarily want a very poetic and colorful dissertation on themselves. The third time, and this is really tricky, and this is why I do not do predictive astrology. Always in motion is the future, Yoda said. And no, I'm not going to do my Yoda impersonation. But he said, always in motion is the future, difficult to see. Gentleman came in to see me. He said, I want to know if my Bitcoin is going to keep going up. And I'm like, oh, geez, I don't know. I'd have to have Bitcoin's chart. Well, what do you think? And so I was forced to make an intuitive guess on something that I had to make a quick guess on, or quick observation on, and something that I didn't have all the information on. And here's the trick. I just invested a tiny bit amount of money, the little bit I had, into Bitcoin. So I was like, yes, it's going to keep going up. Well, a week later, it lost 50%.
Oh dear.
So we have to be very careful with prediction in terms of any of our own influences going into that, our own preferences. Am I going to die in 2 weeks? Well, let's look. You're my friend. No, you're not going to. But so we have to be very careful with our own biases when we do readings like that.
Which is one of the reasons that I had a fellow astrologer make a great point. He says he doesn't make predictions, but he will make forecasts. So like I can tell you it's going to be cold in January, unless you live in Australia. So I can tell you what the themes of the next year might be. Like I know this woman's going to have Neptune on her Saturn. I can give her the ideas of what's going to happen, but I always want to leave the parameters wide enough that they can recognize these 10 different things that happen to them all fit in that set of parameters. But I do understand what you're saying. Everything does keep moving. So Stacy, you had something to say to this topic.
Yeah, sure. Sometimes it's difficult because as an astrologer, we're trained to look at the whole total dynamics. And sometimes there are difficult dynamics, sometimes there are easy ones. And, it's our responsibility to really communicate what we see. And, not all, the whole point of an astrology reading, you're not responsible for what the client does. Astrology is based on choice. You can't be responsible for a client who isn't making the choices that the symbols are advocating for. Or I guess they're advocating for something all the time. You could go one way or another, but we have to remember that our time and our interpretation is not something that should just be refunded if someone doesn't like what we've said, because that's one of the things that kind of kept me from practicing astrology for a really long time, is that people wanted to be entertained and they wanted to hear really good news, and it's not always that way. And so yeah, I guess that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. You can't please all the people all the time.
Yeah, you can't. You just have to speak to the dynamics and
think is astrology's truth.
well, yeah. Yeah, and I guess for an example, I had a client who was who contacted me at a time where she was in a relationship with a person who wasn't out for her best interests, and her intuition was telling her these things, but she was such a Piscean type of character that she just wanted to keep helping and helping and helping until she couldn't any longer, even though she felt this thing in her gut that told her something isn't right about this. And as it turned out, you can give the advice and say, try to pay attention to this and that, speak to their Venus and make sure that they're oriented to their core personal values and, not projecting too much stuff outwards. But in the end, it's the client's choice. And so we're just messengers. And so that's just something that, comes along with the territory.
And it's always annoying when they don't take our great and wonderful wisdom seriously. Anyway, just as I mentioned before we go to the next question, which Michaela's up for, it's about 5:13 here, or at least we have about 15 minutes left for a 90-minute show. So let's do one more question and wrap up after that, I'm thinking, if that's okay, Sue. Makes sense to me. Okay.
Fine with me.
Okay, Michaela, you got one you want to whip out?
I think I left the last one to you because I took up quite a lot of time with the quotation. So
okay.
I'll leave the last one to you. I think
this is
quite a good
relatively quickie. Your opinions on astrocartography. In just really quickly, my take is that I believe it does work. I do believe it adds nuances to your chart. The birth chart is always the guider and the governor. I've always told people it's like if you're a truck driver in Boston, you're not going to become a ballerina in Cairo just because you moved there. But I do think sometimes it will bring out subtle nuances depending upon where you move to, like a little shift in your chart, maybe not a major deal. Now, I've lived in New York City my entire life, so I can't really answer this question personally, but I'm just wondering, have you used astrocartography? What has been your experience with it? How well do you think it works? Ryan.
I have lots of experience with astrocartography.
You are a Sag, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Especially since I am a Sagittarius, and I have experienced all sorts of locational, what do we call it? Just different experiences in different locations. Case in point, I moved from the place of my birth to a Uranus line.
Whoa.
And yeah. I worked for myself. I also experienced a constant rapid change. I experienced incredible trauma, but I also developed myself as an astrologer. They all fit the Uranus archetype. Well, what did I choose to do? Hey, let's leave the Uranus line and let's go live on a Neptune line. Sure, I'm a Sun Neptune. Let me live on my Sun Neptune Mercury line. Sounds great, huh? Well, Neptune is wonderful for sitting at the beach and looking out at the ocean and getting the inspiration, but actually sitting down to write your book, good luck. So yeah, I put a lot of credence, just having those two. Oh, so then eventually I moved back to my Uranus line, and in a screw the world, I'm going to do what I need to do for me kind of experience, I moved back to the Uranus line, and it's been great. But just having those experiences personally, I know now that there's some validity to that. So whenever somebody contacts me about relocating, I'll say, well, yeah, you're going to move to a Pluto line, and there can be magnificent alignments with destiny and personal power and incredible transformation where you'll be a different person when you're done. and there could be some, trauma, crisis, or other shadow experiences associated with it. My daughter moved to a Pluto line. I had to tell her these things. Oh my God, honey, do I want to see my daughter move to a Pluto line? She found her power. She transformed. She came into the fullness of her being, aligned with destiny, and then moved. So thank goodness it was no crisis, but were there Plutonian themes? You bet there were. So,
I mean, it depends on the natal planet is acting, doesn't it? What the aspects are in the natal chart, how a planetary line will figure out how it will pan out.
Yep, I think it all is part of it. All is part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I would also think that if you move, you're still your chart, but like you say, Pluto will be activated. If you move to a Pluto line, Uranus will be more activated. But it's still, I would assume, in the context of your basic chart anyway. So that's the way I look at it. Any other comments about astrocartography? While people are thinking about it, we had a meetup in New York once, and it was all about astrocartography, and some guy was complaining we figured out the best place for him to live was like in the Indian Ocean somewhere, which of course is like part of the joke about astrocartography. You still have certain limitations of where you might move to affect what you might wish to affect in your chart, okay, well, nobody's, I don't know if I have any quickie questions at the moment, because we sort of try to blend between heavy ones and quickie ones. So let's ask a real quick question, not necessarily going into depth. How do you approach the so-called new outer planets? Are you like skeptical? Do you have one eye raised waiting for results? There are some that you embrace quicker than others. We're talking Eris, Maku, Sedna, Hakama, I can't even pronounce half of them. Just what your feelings are about them, nothing too heavy or deep. Go ahead, Stacy.
I know some people who are really, they've really had a focus on Eris and Sedna, and, but myself, I don't deal with any of those because I kind of believe that you need a good period of observation and correlation before you can really comment intelligently about it. And I think some people out there have given that focus. And so I just, if a client wants to know about those planets, I refer them to others. So
I know Henry Seltz has released a book on Eris, I think, and Alan Clay, I believe his name is, did a book on Sedna, and the lectures have been interesting. But I don't necessarily use them. Ryan and Eric. So Ryan, let her rip.
Sure. Yeah, I will definitely use the newer outer planets, especially when they make poignant aspects to the nodes or the luminaries, or if they're conjoined another planet that will help to color them. And I do believe that these are new parts of our awakening consciousness that we are just beginning to become aware of. We're just beginning to become aware of our Eris wound that may go back further than our Pluto wound, back to Homo habilis for that matter. Do we know? Not all the way. And so I'm playing with them. I'm entertaining them. I'm not using them as religiously as, say, I would Venus or Mars, and saying, this is what I know about, your relationship or your need for courage or whatever it is. So I'm slowly integrating them cautiously. But things like Eris especially, it's becoming more and more and more apparent that there is really something there. And I think the more that we and this is kind of how astrology works too, the more that we put energy into these archetypes, the more that we project meaning onto these archetypes, the more those archetypes then reflect back whatever it is that we are projecting onto them. And so
Sure.
the more time that goes by that we can project this meaning onto them, the more their meaning will be reflected back.
I do agree with your comments about the evolution of us, whatever that means. Clearly, Uranus was tied into when it was discovered. Neptune was, and so did Pluto. It's fascinating that a whole bunch have been suddenly discovered now, and we are entering the Aquarian age, anywhere from 200 years ago to the last week. I don't know when we started, but I think we are on a shift of a rebirth of humanity in some way. And I think just this is a wrap up, just commented, Uranus square Saturn is certainly an example of the old fighting with the new and trying to decide, you know, who's going to win this battle, the conservatives or the progressives. And I'm not using the terms just politically. You can be conservative without being political. Like, don't change anything. We don't want to screw it up. Now, both Sarah and Eric had their hands up and took their hands down. So we have about 6 or 7 minutes till we're done.
Yeah.
If there's anything in addition.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I-
Can I jump in? Or
Sorry, go
or
ahead,
if Eric's
Eric.
about to jump in, go right ahead, Eric. Sorry.
I just wanted to say that I'm going to let you have the floor because I misunderstood the question. I thought we were talking about hypothetical planets, not the ones that were recently discovered. So go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I this is just my personal take on all of this as a practice, astrology. When we find a body and it becomes named, to me, it's like removing the shade of consciousness collectively from that facet of our individual and collective consciousness. So those newer outer planets, especially Saturn with her like 11,000 year orbit, and even when you look into her mythology, like we can see, as was spoken earlier about this, you know, it does go far back into the consciousness of humanity. And so I don't know, I like exploring it. I don't necessarily use these bodies professionally in a reading unless, like Brian was saying, they're hitting a serious angle or a planet. I might integrate it if I'm observing that in the client, like connecting to their persona or their life experiences. But yeah, I just wanted to say it's really exciting, actually. Like Anthony was saying, we're on a precipice of a huge awakening. And so we're seeing these discoveries just pop off left, right, and center. So it's fun to explore.
Yeah.
Honestly, if I was 27 instead of 67, I might be more interested in it too, because I would want to see it play out over time. But, you know, we overlap the way we do. However, I don't mind dealing with my past lives, but I don't want to take on the guilt of my Cro-Magnon ancestors. There's only so much I can handle. You club Thack. Oh, yeah, it was a mistake. I'm sorry. You know, and stole his mastodon. It's like, yeah, right, whatever. Anyway, it's about 5:25. We've knocked out about 90 minutes. It's about when we kind of wrap up. Is there anything in particular somebody would like to just say or point out or mention, like, hey, and otherwise we can get ready for the next one on October 21st. And I do want to mention, if anybody wants to propose questions to be asked, contact Sue, contact me, contact Michaela, and just send us ideas. We like to have a blend of about 2/3 lighter ones that we can sort of roll through quickly, and with a few little heavy duty stuff thrown in to, you know, get some real depth going. Any last minute comments, questions? Sue, you want to wrap us up?
I want to say great job, everyone. I'm really pleased at how we all came together and pulled it off.
Yeah,
She
you
planted
too.
some good seeds.
And
Yeah.
Robin, really well.
Okay. Have a
Should be
good night,
interesting in
everybody.
October because a lot of planets will have gone direct. So a lot of development.
But Uranus will be going backwards then. So
Oh,
getting
God,
ready
yeah.
to catch up with the next square. The next square is December, I think. Saturn Uranus square. So
Right.
we could have fun with
All
that when it
happening.
turns up.
Great
All
to
right,
talk
everybody.
about it all, though. Great talk. Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome.
Really good.
Namaste
Thank you
to
all.
everybody. See you down the road. Take care, everybody.